Good afternoon. It is high noon in Atlanta, and we are thankful for you joining us again for another Lunch and Learn topic sponsored by the Georgia Tech Supply Chain and Logistics Institute. We've got a great topic today, and it's all about the why and the importance of investing in frontline leadership in supply chain and logistics. And I am very excited today to be joined by Bryan Weaver, and I'm going to let Bryan introduce himself, but Bryan and I have known each other for a long time through our work at Coca-Cola, and fortunately, we're both on the Georgia Tech team now. So Bryan, I would welcome you to give a little intro.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Excited to be here. It's always fun to catch up with you and talk about people topics. I think it's just an important time. I think people are, leadership and people is always important and maybe never as important as it is right now, given the environment that we're in. So happy to be here and have this discussion. Hope it's helpful to the people that are listening. I am Bryan Weaver. I'm the region manager for East Metro Atlanta for the Georgia Manufacturing Extension Partnership at Georgia Tech. If you don't know who we are, the way I would describe our group is we're a group of experienced advisors in manufacturing operations. We're here to share knowledge and best practices through on-site projects, coaching, training, networking services to help companies overcome challenges and grow. We're here mainly to focus on small and medium-sized manufacturers. We'll work with larger operations at times, but we can help you with anything from process improvement through lean, development of quality management systems, helping you find technology and automation. So happy to be here, happy to have this conversation. As Chris alluded to, prior to joining the MEP last year, I spent 30 years in manufacturing and warehousing, a lot of that at Coca-Cola with Chris. Which was a great blessing to me. So happy to be here and just share some of those experiences, and hopefully this will be helpful to everybody.
Thanks, Bryan. So when we are talking frontline leadership, we are literally talking about people who lead operational employees in a manufacturing facility, in a distribution center, people managing drivers. So it's that first line supervisor. And Bryan, you and I have both held those roles and been fortunate to receive a lot of training. And I think that's part of the message that we're going to convey today, is that there are people who are good at this, but there are very few people who are born good at this, and that there is clearly a role for formal and informal training for folks to really be at their best as a frontline leader, lead well for results. So let's dive in. And, I think, going to provide a variety of perspectives here, but everybody on the call, and I know we have some friends who've joined, have seen this on both sides, right? They have led teams and they have been led. And in a nice way, we've probably all been led well and all been led not so well in our experience. And what we know is that employees' engagement, their willingness to give their best and give discretionary effort, it's heavily influenced by your direct manager. Now, that's true whether you're a frontline employee or you're a professional. But there's lots of data that's out there. I like the folks at Gallup. They do rigorous work that's out there. And so that's kind of the stat that we have. And I would tell you, as Bryan does, I'm fortunate to interact now with lots of folks in industry in our work at Georgia Tech, and it adds to the experience we had when we were, at Coca-Cola and working other places, is that most frontline supervisors got that role by being the best person on the floor. Okay, they were a very high quality frontline associate. They delivered their work well. They showed up every day. They were a good teammate. They could take direction, but they could also be self-directed if something came upon them that wasn't what they expected. And that led a lot of those folks, after being, in position for a period of time, to be identified to say, hey, let's take on that leadership role when something comes up. And that's wonderful, but it's no different than in the military. Those battlefield promotions ultimately don't equip someone to be completely successful as a leader. And what we know is that that frontline leader has a huge impact on a lot of things that matter in the success of any business, whether they be turnover, safety, or operational outcomes. So Bryan, I've used this idea of a battlefield promotion, but I'd love your perspective on it as well.
Yeah, Chris, I think it's the right idea, and it resonates with me because I can share the experience of my own battlefield promotion. Some 25, 30 years ago. I go back to, it was 1997. I was 28 years old, and Coke was building a new facility in Pennsylvania. Very automated at the time, probably most state-of-the-art plant I'd ever been in at that early in my career. And I went up there as the local IT manager. I went up there to help get the technology up and running. And I think through that experience, looking back at it, I got involved in all parts of the plant because there was technology and automation through every part of it. So very early on, I got to know the operation pretty well and could kind of see the bigger picture. And I did well. And I think, the leadership there, kind of saw some potential, right or wrong at the time. And they came to us as things got a little bit stressful in this first couple of years, said, "Hey, Bryan, would you be willing to be a production supervisor for this team?" So it was a promotion for me. I said, "Sure." I'm 28, didn't know any better. And I think I walked out the door Friday as the IT guy and walked into a shift meeting at 7 a.m. on Monday morning, looking at 30 people on a shift. I think everybody in the room was older than me, and were expecting me to give them a plan for the day. And I'm like, man, I'm way over my head right off the bat, right? And I learned pretty quickly, I could learn the technical parts of whatever I didn't know already. I could learn those pieces pretty quickly. But what I wasn't really prepared for was, how to drive engagement with the team, how to really connect individually, how to build a plan where everybody could be successful for the day, and then deal with the challenges that would come up. And dealing with, quite honestly, the stress of startup, age gaps and experiences between myself, my team, between the team members, our experience gaps on the team, interpersonal dynamics, personal work-life kind of issues that come into the workplace. I just was wholly unprepared for all of that. And for a lot of reasons, our team didn't have a lot of initial success when we first started up. I don't think that's all because of my leadership, but I look back knowing I could have been a much better leader. And if I knew then what I know now, that old statement was true. I would have done it differently and I would have done it better. And I'm grateful for all those experiences because I think it made me a much better leader later in my career. When I was running plants and operations, I always went back and drew on those leadership experiences. But I think you're right. As we think about, hey, how do we move high potential people into these leadership roles? How do we take, their knowledge and build on that in a way that says, hey, they're really ready to be great people leaders and be able to drive that kind of engagement. And it's such a force multiplier for success, because when you get that right, a lot of people gain productivity. A lot of people gain engagement in the company, what's going on. And that leader role is just so, so important. And I always go back and lean on that experience every time we talk about this kind of topic.
Yep. I would say for me, we are not making the case that battlefield promotions are not a good idea. Right. I actually think it's a wonderful idea. And I also think it is a great message to send, to have continuity in an organization. So I think that's the first message I would contend. So we advocate for battlefield promotions, but what we have seen in a lot of the studies is that the time between people getting that battlefield promotion and getting any structured training is measured in many years. I have heard as much as 9 years before the average first line supervisor gets formal training. What we're advocating is compress that time and get those folks that training right away. I went into a frontline leadership position out of school with Frito-Lay, and at the time Frito-Lay put degreed folks into those frontline roles, and we had training right away, and it was still very difficult. So I think the right blend of promoting from within and bringing in professional talent is a great idea and a great strategy, but what we're just saying, training is a critical part of the success recipe.
Yeah, totally agree. I think your best leaders in your organization, because they've got the deep knowledge of how things run and they've got the relationships to build on. You're right, Chris. How do we accelerate that? How do we tap into the potential for that and maximize that potential much faster? And when you get that right, I think it's a magic solution to the equation.
Yeah. So when we talk to folks about this, and it's a bit of a paradox, we struggle with people getting this training and this investment, and there are a variety of objections for it. I mean, the biggest objection, I think, in most cases is time, but cost comes at this as well. And this is the classic Covey example of sharpening the saw, is that we make a strong case that there's just a compelling return on investment here. And anyone who's trying to staff these roles knows the pain of what it takes when you've got to fill that role. Okay. It doesn't always come in a planned setting. You've got to come up with an interim. We know many managers who have to step into those roles and run the shift in the meantime. There's a real cost to that. And I think the stat that we've got here is a number that's in the range that I've heard for years. It's probably a conservative number. But if we talk about the cost of getting the right training, you eat that up real quick when you have turnover at that frontline role, particularly when you may not get it right, because finding the right person is a crapshoot in many cases. So you may endure that cost more than once a year. The overall space of disengaged employees and people not feeling good about how they're led at work is a staggering number. And I'm not going to talk about what that number looks like. It's a global number, but that is intended to be a trillion there. Everyone knows what it's like when you're not engaged and what's at stake in terms of the impact for an employee giving their best, showing up every day, being excited to come to work when they're well led versus not. And what we know is that I think we're lucky if we say 2/3 of employees who feel engaged at work. Okay. And so Bryan, I'm not sure if you would build on any of these with your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just on the cost of it, what I experienced is, it wasn't so much the turnover, I think, that I experienced in my career. When I took over a couple different teams, it was just the lower productivity rate. People that were working at a different level, and the term, I wouldn't call it quiet quitting, but just a quiet pace of work. And a lot of times people wanted to do better, but they're lacking leadership to point them in the right direction too, right? So it wasn't all on a person saying, "Hey, I'm not engaged." It was truly, "Hey, I need some support here. I need some leadership. I need some direction on what to do." And so we had to focus on improving that really quickly, which sometimes involves finding new leaders, growing those leaders to help them give the team better direction. Was something I saw as I went through this in my career.
So, we're making the case. It's a real cost. That I think that's the first thing that's there. And I think here, we go beyond just keeping people. You mentioned it right there, Bryan. There's a strong belief in our view that if you've got people well led, and their managers are equipped to schedule them well, put a plan for the day, but also then deal with all the curveballs that come in the day, then we get serious impact in productivity. I think it's a small thing, but not trivial, because at the front line, we see lots of turnover, but well-trained leaders are much more effective at how they can bring new people into the team. So, a clear thing that occurs all the time for us is how fast can you get a new employee to be effective when they join an organization. I think it goes without saying is it's hard to create an environment where employees, particularly at the front line, feel motivated and feel comfortable bringing their ideas to the table. But if you can get that engine in place in terms of where frontline employees feel like that their input is accepted, valued, and rewarded, I think that's a huge differentiator. And that is, that's kind of gold star. But if you can get that in place, you can get a lot. And then obviously, when we talk about engagement, it's not just what they do when they show up. It's the fact that they show up and they stay and they work well amongst others. So Bryan, any builds on that?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Chris. And I think it's really, really kind of just being mentally focused on the fact that, your frontline leaders are the keepers of your culture. And if you want a culture that's productivity driven, innovation driven, high level of engagement, your frontline leader has to be the voice of that. They have to be the ambassador for that. So all of these things are very possible, but I think teams will follow the behaviors and the actions of their leader. And if you want that kind of culture, you've got to be able to identify people that can do that and then help them, support them, grow them, give them capabilities to be that kind of influencer. To use a more modern term, right? In society, we've got influencers helping us influence all kinds of things. We need internal influencers in our organization building the culture that we want to have. And frontline leaders are the key to that. I think that's just really important that you're focused on helping leaders be those kinds of positive influences for the kind of culture you want to have on your team.
Yeah, I recall as a first line supervisor at Frito-Lay when I managed over the road drivers. And to your point, Bryan, most of those folks were my father's age, right? So they were very seasoned, and they were adults, and I was right out of school. And I had good coaching in a formal way. I did have training, but I also had a nice transition from the prior manager. And it was very clear to me early on, you're going to be building routes for these guys. Where are they going? Where are they going to get their backhaul? What's a reasonable dispatch time? What's a reasonable expectation of on-time delivery? And I was very excited after a few months on the job when people would come back and say, I think we could do this in a different way. And it was humbling, but also, what I realized was if I can take that feedback in place, the word will get around. People will say, if this isn't doing well, you can go to Chris and say, I wouldn't schedule that to dispatch at 6 a.m. I think you need to do that at 3. I remember I had a lot of my drivers like NASCAR at the time, and they're like, we actually want you to dispatch us so we can get on layover by the time the race starts. We'll get there on time, but we like to watch the race. And I was like, okay, now I'm listening and learning to what matters to these folks, and we can find a solution that allow us to get the business done, but also be respectful to what people are doing as they live their lives driving for us. So I have very positive memories about that. So here's some other stats that are out there, and we've talked a lot about the productivity gain. So I won't go further into that other than to say, when you're talking about making the case internally, I just won't lose sight of that. But I also think, I think times are tough in this day and age. And this is the time when you get the paradox of somebody saying, hey, I need productivity, but we don't have time for training. So Bryan, I think if you can help me with that paradox and how you make the case and have made the case here, I think it would be great.
I think it's just a matter of being creative, to find the time and find the bandwidth. And it's also looking at it truly like I think this here says top companies invest in growing people to get their productivity. And I think it is an investment. So for me, I always focused on, when I was running a plant later in my career, we would try to step back and create an overall plan for the month, starting with and anchoring that plan on when were we going to do training and development with the team, right? So, on a day-to-day basis, if you're trying to plan training tomorrow, it's always hard to find time in the production schedule. If you're trying to plan into the next week, it's hard to find time. But if you step back over a month-long window, and that's part of your cadence and schedule as a leadership, you can start to find time. And if you widen that out to a quarterly or an annual kind of calendar, it was much easier to make a decision, say, okay, we're going to look at the slowest periods of time in our plant operational cadence, and that's the time we're going to pick, and we're going to pick to get multiple things out of that. Maybe it's a shutdown window where we're doing maintenance, and then we're taking the rest of the team, we're doing training. It's a matter of how you kind of go about it. And that was one of the ways I always found success is, the old adage of, you put the big rocks in first and then the small rocks and the sand and everything fills in around. The question is, how do you do that? And how do you make training capability a big rock that you can get into the jar first? And so for me, I think it was always kind of anchoring on, hey, I know that's important. I know that's the key to success, but it's an investment I got to find room to make. Let me figure out a plan, a cadence, and plan around that, make an anchor to plan around that versus trying to fit it in where I can. And I think that's where it gets really, really hard. So that's one thing that's a best practice I would say, or something I was at least successful with, when running a plant later in my career that I learned is, kind of widen out your time frame and create a longer horizon and start making those decisions and anchor your plan, knowing you have times to build those kind of capabilities. And then individually, I think, you've also got to have a really good handle on your organization, a good cadence for how you go through your team. You identify high performers, identifying the people that you want to grow into that next generation leader, and build them a true development plan. Work with them to kind of build in a cadence of whether that's going to be team-based activities or individual things you want to go outside and send them to classes or workshops, through a place like Georgia Tech, and say, okay, here's how I'm going to invest in this individual, and make a long-term plan about how I'm going to create bandwidth for that person to do that. It takes intentionality. You have to be purposeful. You have to be intentional to make all that happen. But I think that's one way that I would say, helps you get it done, gives you a higher potential for success for sure.
So we kind of we're shifting from the why to the what, but I don't think you can, you can't stop without talking about safety. And I made the point as we talk, and we do a lot of workforce development, and that's at the frontline level, even below. That's kids in high school and thinking about where they'll go to work. And we're trying to make the case for them that supply chain jobs in manufacturing plants and in warehouses and distribution centers, fulfillment centers are great jobs. And we know those jobs are out there. But a lot of the parents and even grandparents have a lot of reticence about their kids going into these environments because they recall either their own experience or grandparents' experience working in operating settings. And what we know is in the modern world, the facilities don't look the same, but that safety concern is always out there. Am I going to return home in the same condition in which I arrived? And, we have a strong view that the frontline leader has a lot to say about it. So I'd be curious your thoughts on these stats and your own experience.
I mean, I think you're right on, Chris. The thing I always look for these opportunities, because I think there's no better way to show how you care for people than making sure they're safe, right? So as a frontline leader, and helping your frontline leaders make that a priority is critical. I mean, the experience I would share, later in my career at Coke, we were working in one of the concentrate facilities, and I was the general manager of the plant, and I was walking the floor as I would do on a regular basis, as most operational leaders do. And I came into one of the production areas, and one of my operators stopped me and said, "Hey, this is a new material we're dealing with, and we're starting to set up for this production run. And I see this label that gives me pause. Is this safe for me to handle, right? And am I handling it the right way?" And the decision we made in the moment is, okay, well, let's just stop. Let's just stop what we're doing. Let's just take a minute. Let's set this activity to the side. Let's go find our safety and environmental leaders. Let's bring them into this. Let's talk about this. And the decision we made in the moment was, hey, that was needed that day, but let's just not produce this. Let's set this off to the side. Let's move on with other things that we know how to do well, and let's make sure we've got the right safety protocols and plans in place. And out of all that, a lot of good things happened. Obviously, we were sure we were handling it the right way, but that person and that team felt cared for and felt like, hey, the leadership sees us. We're more than just a person to get through this job today. And I think those kinds of things, making your frontline leaders aware, hey, go look for these opportunities. Make this part of your cadence on a daily basis. Again, I go back to, if you want a safety culture, your frontline leader sets the tone for that. Are they walking the facility looking for opportunities to be more safe every day? And so I think it just has to be top of mind all the time.
Yeah, and I would say, you said it, culture, and I always say culture is a fancy word, but what it means is what actions and behaviors are acceptable. And if forklift drivers driving too fast are acceptable, then everybody drives too fast. And what I know saw in the cultures we live with are simple phrases like safety first or safety matters. And I think what we want to always convey as we get a frontline leader and we train them well, equip them well, reward them well, that safety is the foundation, quality is right there with it, and the productivity will come beyond that. And if you can convey that to employees every day, they will see that, they will think first, they will care about their peer and make sure their safety operations, or their actions are safe. Things like lockout, tag out, all those things become, this is what we do first. And we get all this stuff right. As we say, we're very safe. We focus on quality. We're effective. Then we start thinking about productivity. And I think we've always said if you take that route and teach that route, all good things will come from that.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add there, I think as you become a senior leader in that kind of environment, learn to celebrate the decision to stop and do the right thing as much as you celebrate the high performing moment, right? Hey, we hit our highest productivity goal today we ever hit. Great, let's celebrate that, but also celebrate the decision to stop the line to make sure we're getting safety and environmental things right. So, find a way to do that as a senior leader and create that environment for your frontline team so that that decision can get made more frequently.
Nope. I think it's great. My good friend Juan Juarez has a comment. Creating a checklist for a new supervisor and scheduling floor walks are a great way to increase engagement with the associates. And you got it right, Juan. You've taught me a lot. Those checklists obviously start with safety, quality, and productivity. So you beat me to it. And I do think, as you said, for a new supervisor, this gives them a job aid that they can work with every day. So I love it. And Juan, I know you've been there and you've led those teams. So great to have you on with us. So Bryan, we've kind of got to why employees leave, and people start with money, and money is real, but the reality is there are a lot of other reasons that create the motive for someone to say, where can I go make some more money? And a number of the things that we think are connected to a commitment to training and development get you to that place, okay? And here it could be the frontline leader who's not well led, but it could also be frontline associate who's not well led, or it's also the frontline leader who doesn't feel supported. And if that frontline leader doesn't feel that they have a path to advancement, that they're not being equipped with skills that could allow them to compete for higher order roles, every time they ask for support for training and development, there's not a commitment to it. And ultimately, you get in a big bind there in terms of a frontline leader saying, am I really set up to be successful here? So, your thoughts on this idea of connecting a commitment to training and development to people's interest in staying or motivation to leave your organization?
Yeah, I think you're right, Chris. I think it's easy to focus on compensation, right? And it is super important. You've got to get that right. I think as I got later in my career, I think we got much smarter at understanding the landscape of the labor market around us and where did we sit in that labor market and were we truly paying people enough to be competitive in that market? And we got a lot better about that. But to your point, that only gets you so far in the matrix, right? And you've got to figure out ways to go deeper. Again, working in the concentrate system, and working in the plant down in Atlanta, we had a great team. Had been in place a long time, but as I got in there in year 2 of running that facility, working with our leadership team, we started talking and said, we've really got an opportunity. If we could find a better way to give some people some development opportunities, it's going to be huge. And and the good news was even back then, and this was a while ago, we have many more resources now, many more than I was aware of, then, now kind of sitting where I sit. But when you look around the landscape of all the potential partners that you can work with to build capability building plans, you don't have to generate it yourself. We created some partnerships with some outside entities that helped give our teams a chance. And we used the programs at Coke for tuition reimbursement and things like that to create the easy path for people to say yes to development, which I think was the real key, right? So we went and curated a set of courses that could lead to an associate degree and those kinds of things. And so we created an easy path for people to get in. And we also created, it was part of that program, we created a shared cohort where 15, 20 people could go do this at a time. And it was a self-elected process that they could get into. And I think we had 18, 20 people make that choice and go down that path and commit to going to classes together outside of working time, and leveraging that opportunity to go do development. And I thought it was a great culture changer. I thought it was a great way to see the people on your team that really desired that next level of opportunity for education and development, people that weren't just talking the game. And it was awesome. And so, I think it's just your point, How do you do that? How do you create that development plan that's right for your organization? I'd encourage people, look at the resources that are around you. Think about the priorities. Think about your cohort and your team that are there. How do you make it easy for people to say yes to development? And then whatever you can do within your tools of your organization and the resources you have and around you, to make that as easy as possible for people to do that. The more people you can get to say yes, the better, and it could be a real multiplier into your organization.
Absolutely. Well, this is one that I think is important, and I think it's important for the frontline leader, because a lot of those frontline leaders, are anchored to their community. They're not necessarily looking to work all over the country and all over the world. They have a reason to be in that market, and they have a reason to work in that market, whether it's family ties or whatever. So you've got the opportunity for them to be with you for a long time, and grow with you. And you see that stat that, if you could get someone who would be committed to your organization with the right opportunities to commit to stay 10 years in a difficult job, we know these are hard jobs, you don't want to lose them. But that same audience really does want that training. Okay. That same audience does need access to a mentor. Okay. That may or may not be in the building, depending on how the size of that building is. And a lot of them need to understand where this could lead them so that they could feel good about not only being successful in the current role, investing in their own skills and capabilities, but seeing that an organization really can give them a path and a career and an opportunity, to not only feel the satisfaction of growing professionally, but be better equipped to take care of their family, right? And, our version of the American dream. And I think this is not a small thing. So I don't know if you've got a thought on that.
No, I think people need to have their bucket filled, right? Like, I think you can't just, and I think it's easy for frontline supervisors and leaders to constantly be pouring out and not getting that bucket refilled. And so I think, to your point, the longer you can retain that person and keep them in the organization, we know that that's a benefit to cost and productivity and engagement. Changing out a coach of the team every few months is just not a way to win. And I think the other thing I would think about here too is just even within the job, how do you keep it fresh and different for that person? I'm a strong advocate for rotating people through different leadership positions too. Like, you don't want to do that. Hey, this week you're in one area, next week you're in another. But thinking, hey, if I've got a high potential leader, I don't want to just build their expertise and leading in one area. How do I move them into different parts of the operation? So swapping leaders into different areas and getting some different experiences is also a great way to just keep it fresh, and a simple way to make things interesting and people to build skills with new people and different relationships. But bottom line is, Chris, I think you just gotta, if you want to retain people, you've got to keep them learning and growing, and you got to give them time to step away from it from time to time and rebuild those juices, because we're not all extroverts, right? Some of us are introverts in these leadership roles. I'll raise my hand, right? So you need to find time to kind of rebuild and be ready to go.
Yep, we've got a few examples here, that's more tangible for us, and I would definitely call out the Coke example. And you can go to this website and see this is something that was developed after Bryan and I left Coke, but something that I still would call out. A big part of Coke's business is the food service business, and that's a you all been there. That's a restaurant business where you've got a leader in the front of the house and potentially a leader in the back of the house. Throughout the hospitality industry. And, that's a classic example of a place where all the things we talk about translate. And so Coke has come up with a program that I think you might be able to sign up for yourself, not even have to be in their business or industry, and get access to some of these frontline skills. And so I'm thrilled to see that a place that we spent a lot of time sees that opportunity and is actually willing to share externally. I mean, I think they've got, I don't know if it's 600,000 restaurants that serve Coke in the fountain. But it's out there, right? And so I think that's our point, is there is a lot out there. And I think we've done a lot to make the case that it's out there. And now, Bryan, I think it's great to shift to say, now that we made the case to say it's really important, let's talk about the what. And I'd love for you to lead on this one.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this a lot, and this kind of to me brings the point home. This is something we share with our clients, and I love this thought. But it's this, the concept of emotional intelligence kind of sums up a lot of what we talked about. In your frontline leaders, do they have the ability, a really high level of ability or IQ for managing not just themselves but their relationships? And you can see this. This research comes from one of our research partners that we leverage in the manufacturing extension, but that tells the story. In any kind of job, emotional intelligence is the most important thing. Technical skills are still really important for a lot of individual contributor roles, but the really interesting thing is when you move to the right and you look at leadership, how much more important those emotional intelligence skills become. Right? If you look at that jump and go, hey, as leaders, I'm going to have to let go of some of my technical knowledge and skill. I'm going to have to get way better at dealing with how I manage myself and my relationships in the workplace. And that's why we have continued to kind of focus on how do we help companies do that, because it's just that critical for success.
So if we click down into some of these soft skills, Bryan, I'd love for you to kind of talk through this one as well.
Yeah, I think these are the things we've the building blocks. I would say I think a lot goes into having a high emotional intelligence, but where do you start? Where do you kind of foundationally get going? And I think when you can talk about these things, but how do you help people be the best communicators? And to me, communication is, you said it earlier in this group, how do you become a great listener? It is really a learned skill, right? How do you provide effective coaching? How do you do that in different situations with different people in different situational leadership roles? I mean, conflicts are going to come up, right? You're going to have sources of conflicts between, there's the age old thing just between day shift and night shift, or between leadership and the team on the floor, between individuals, just even within processes along a production line. Hey, we're killing it up here, but hey, we need this team upstream of us to do better. There's going to be times where there's conflict, and then just the cultural awareness. We're all come to work with a different set of experiences, and we need to value all those things and make sure we're being leveraging that to the best of our ability and being aware of all that. But I think when you look at these things, the one thing I would say is I think a lot of times we think emotional intelligence and soft skills are something people are born with versus, something that can be developed. I can teach you how to do the math. I can teach you how to push the buttons, but how do I teach you to be a better people person? And sometimes we set that aside and go, well, they either can or they can't. And I would dispute that. Say, hey, look, if we break this down into learnable skills and chunks and start with some basic building blocks, we can develop people into great people leaders. And so I think that's just something that we got to learn to be better at and find the right resources to help do that in our organizations.
Yeah, I can tell you, I cared a lot. I was well led and poorly led early on. And when I got into that leadership role, I cared. But it also wasn't easy for me, right? I'm a middle child. I love to avoid conflict, right? I want everything to be copacetic. And, coaching is not always about giving people great feedback. You did a great idea. The challenging part of coaching is to say you're not where you need to be. And so how you have that conversation in a way that creates receptiveness, but also where you can actually help somebody go from point A to B. I think that, that requires some guardrails, and that's where training comes in. And I think conflict resolution is exactly the same. There are plenty of people who love to create conflict. There are not that many who are really good at doing it in a way that gets to a good outcome that allows the parties involved to be able to work better together going forward, not have kind of residual bumps and bruises from that. And I think that, those things require real training. And I think in the overall awareness piece is we all grew up in the home that we grew up with. And as we grow as a leader, it's almost like being a pitcher. The first thing you got to do is get good at throwing the fastball, but eventually the fastball alone won't work. And I think having the ability to have styles that can adapt to different situations and different people, I think is also something that requires training, that you can say, no, now I've got 3 pitches. I know how to deal with younger employees. I know how you deal with senior employees. I know how to deal with people who grew up in a different part of the world than I did. those are the things that I think, again, just don't come naturally to very many folks.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. And I think, I think one of the highest levels of a mature leader to me, especially as you get some experience and you start to have a right intuition and you start to see the answer before the question's even asked of your team, I think probably one of the most evolved things you can do as a leader is not answer the question immediately. Don't give the answer right away, and ask a good leading question to help the team member get there on their own. I think that's, to me, is a wonderful style of leadership that starts to help really grow the next level of leaders. So you're starting to feel, when you get to that level as a leader, you're starting to pour into the next level of saying, okay, let me help that person start to build that thought process and start to learn and think and process. And then it's really that coaching of, hey, if you don't exactly get the response, maybe you ask the next lead, have you considered this? Have you thought about that? You start to kind of lead that person based on your own experiences, because if you just give them the answer, how do they ever start to learn the thought process about how you learned that information and how you got there? And I just think that's, as we continue to grow in frontline leaders and giving them these kinds of communication skills and coaching tools, it just reinforces that kind of positive cycle, and they become your development for the next level of leader that's going to come behind them. And that's just such a virtuous cycle when we get to that point.
Yep. Yeah, I'll comment on a couple of these. And I think these are things that are very much enabled and supported by some level of formal commitment to development. That could be structured training, could be mentoring, modeling, but having supervisors lead from the front and demonstrate, if we're going to ask for a behavior, that we behave that way, I think is huge. I'm one of those people where if we get it right, we get small, crisp one-on-ones very frequently, right? Ideally, once a week in an operating environment. That may not be practical, but if you can do it every couple of weeks or at least once a month, that's huge, because people know that there's an opportunity for them to be listened to. But I know plenty of folks, and you could say, when's your last one-on-one? And it would be never, right? So getting to that world, I think, is critical differentiator. It's a show respect kind of thing as well. It does require the leader to be able to manage their time and plan, which is also a taught skill as well. I'm gonna wrap on a couple of these, Bryan, because I'm watching our time. I think there are different ways to do it. I'm a big fan of 70-20-10. I do think there's a role for on-the-job training plus some classroom training. You got to be able to go out there and apply it. We're very sensitive to that. Some of this stuff you've got to see in a class and then go out and try it and get feedback and come back around. We see a lot of our training moving from big blocks of training to smaller blocks with the opportunity to go practice and then come back. And so it's not as big of a single time burden. And I think the idea of this ongoing development, outperforming one-time training events, is definitely something that's moving. And I think also connecting it to what gets measured. What gets measured gets results. So I don't know if you've got a single point of emphasis you would add here, Bryan.
Yeah, no, I like that, Chris. I think it's, what we're seeing success with, and the way we do work with companies is, teach some concepts, to go practice those, and then having the next opportunity to come back and go, how'd you do? And having that check back in. Very much do that plan, do, check that kind of cycle of building skills and capabilities. And so I love that. I think that's the way we would like to teach is, get involved, teach a class, teach a concept, and then go through that feedback loop.
Yep. And I think these last two we included because not everybody here is from a company that has a big structured development program internally and just a framework. And as always, you'll get this recording and you'll get access to the slides. Is thinking about, how does it start with? It starts with understanding what the job needs, right? And then making sure that as we transition to, what each job requires and how do we make sure people are equipped with that, then we've got to do the same thing for folks who lead teams. We saw that 85-15 on the EQ, and I think now we say in leadership, you've got to lean on the soft skills, but we also need to recognize where we've got specialized skill needs that are out there. And then as we graduate, there's that opportunity potentially for more advanced leadership when we get people who are leading teams of teams. So I think this is just a simple framework if you don't have one. And then I think the same thing's true from a roadmap standpoint, right? If you're if you're in an organization and you say, we want to be more intentional about this, here's just kind of a stepped process that may be kind of a good way for you to say, how would we develop our own plan at an organizational level, right? And we always say, start with understanding an assessment of not only the skills that are needed in the role, but where are the gaps with our current workforce? How do we get feedback around people where they want to be? And how do we make sure we understand where we're at risk of losing folks? At the front line, you're usually at risk always. And then use that to start thinking about how you would design a program, whether you do it yourself, whether you go outside. And then how do you use, there's a lot of tools, low-cost tools that allow people to leverage technology to track training. And then we think about how we reinforce that over time. So Bryan, any final thought from you as we're getting close here in terms of how you think about how you've seen this done well, more systemically?
No, I think I made the point several times. The only thing I'd say is it takes some time. You got to block out the time to do this kind of thought and take this kind of content and figure out how to apply it to your team. But it takes intentionality and bandwidth to do that. So I would just encourage people to find the time as leaders to put people plans as a priority in what you do every day, every week, every month.
Superb. Okay, so key takeaways for us is that frontline supervisor is a huge lever for your organization in terms of driving both engagement and operational success. And I've seen companies that have great top-down leadership commitment and strategy, but they don't invest at the front line and it doesn't translate to their operating employees. So they say what the big boss says and what I see are two different things, and that's really devastating. We talked about the fact that you don't spend this investment here, you get turnover and higher risk of safety. And those are real costs to companies that are out there. We've talked about the ROI. If you need to make the case, there's a lot that's out there, and they're easy places to start in terms of where you invest and how you focus for that quick return. We always try to do 2/3, 1/3 here, but the reality is we do have an offering here. And we want to highlight, we've got some upcoming classes. These are actually our classes that are coming up, the top two in Savannah, that are specifically focused on frontline leaders. If you have an interest in this organizationally and you don't live in Savannah and aren't ready for a vacation in Savannah, let us know and we can talk about how we could do those. That second class, Leading for Organizational Excellence, is actually something we're doing with the Georgia Manufacturing Extension Program. And one of their instructors is going to do that. This is a fantastic course. And then we've got some self-paced classes that at least allow people to get jump-started here in this space. So we want you to be aware of those.
I would point out that the courses that you've just highlighted, Chris, are a part of our new certificate, the Supply Chain Operations Leadership. So if what Chris and Bryan has talked about today is really connected with you, either on a personal level, or if someone came to mind and you're like, hey, I've got a frontline leader that I think has the potential going forward, tell them about this certificate or maybe even sign them up for it. So just a quick note on that.
Bryan, I'd love for you to talk about what the MAP offers in this area as well.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so our offering is, what we do is try to work and tailor some training programs and bring those to site with you and work with you on site. Again, like I said before, make it as easy as possible. So this is the way we approach it. We've got, as we talked about core, we always feel like it's good to start with a core set of skills that you could think this mirrors what we talked about earlier. But we have a pretty extensive library and approach, so we can tailor content. We can specialize some courses to you. Our instructors work with you on site, kind of understand the dynamics of your team. And then we can go beyond that with this organizational assessments to help you understand where maybe gaps are. We can do some personal coaching with our team, who are all experienced people who've been in the operations as engineering managers, plant managers, HR managers. So we can bring all that to you and partner with you no matter where you are in the state. So we'd love to talk to you about that. If you flip one more page, Chris, I think there's some QR codes if you're interested in connecting with us, and hopefully you'll get this deck as well. But we have a monthly newsletter. You can follow us on LinkedIn, and then my business card is there on the right. Feel free to scan any and all of those now or when you get the deck in the future, and we'd love to connect with you.
No, that's great. And Bryan, I would also make a point is that you guys are called the Manufacturing Extension Program, but you have an explicit mandate across the supply chain. So you'll play in a DC or fulfillment center, and you've got folks with experiences in that space as well.
Absolutely.
Super. I do want to plug our next Lunch and Learn. Go ahead and hit the QR code. So you've got us reserved for next month. Time flies. Here we are, May 1st, and this one is June. But this is one linked to an article that we've just put out that's really about what we see in large scale decision making in supply chains and what people might miss. And it makes the suggestion that there's some easy steps you can take to ensure that your decision making is considering not just what's right in front of you, but what may be down the road. So that should be a nice discussion as well.
I just want to thank everyone for their time today. As you might have seen, Andy had put it in the chat. Everyone that registered for today's event will receive this recording along with the slide deck. So you can anticipate that coming out near the end of next week.
Yep. And we don't automatically register you for the next webinar, so make sure that you hit the QR code and go ahead and register while it's top of mind. All right. Thanks, Bryan, so much for a great discussion. Always a pleasure to connect again with you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it as always.
Wonderful. All right. Everybody have a great day, and we will see you next month.
Thanks, Chris.